Hello, and welcome to an adventure like no other. Far more than what you have known, there is something far more to be known than you can ever know. And it is all about you, the real you, your real awareness with your intuitive senses. You were never taught that the real you, your real awareness, is operating 5 bodies in cause and effect, restricting creation. You have been taught to think that you are only a one-dimensional human person, with a mind and emotions, and with a very short lifespan on this planet Earth. More than what your mind can grasp is your intuitive senses that can be opened to see beyond all your restrictions. You have always had an opening to see beyond what you have known, and this has been purposely kept from you, and this is where you have heard rumors and stories about your nightly dreams. Your so-called dreams is your opening to your intuitive senses that will allow you, the personal you, to excel beyond what you have previously known. Everyone has intuitive senses, and very few people take advantage of what is possible by recognizing something more than their mind can understand. Creation has its place for all of us, and then there is all life, which is far more than anything than what can become with creation. Everything we experience is necessary for us to survive with whatever we choose and decide our life to be. New Kevin Smith is the great witness to something more than what can be taught and learned in any school. It can be so that when anyone first listens to Kevin's intuitive side experiences, also known as real side experiences, from what their personal mind has known, Kevin's manner of expression will at first be rather different to comprehend. This is where this introduction and reading the new books and Facebook groups will help. Have fun deciding. DUANE the Great Writer and Seer.
This real-side experience would comprise of a series of scenes running in a sequence, although there would be little by way of correlation connecting them. I would find myself infiltrating a large and very advanced-looking complex, a dark force stronghold, and which served as a base of operations for the development of technology, the application of which would be for the maintenance and very likely the escalation of control throughout the simulator. The complex had additional functions also, for it was utilized as a containment facility for certain individuals, those that posed as an undermining threat to the dark forces controlling agendas and ambitions, that on securing such targets, so they were transported to the complex and placed in a comatose state, not unlike suspended animation. As we each are the deciders of our experience, only if we retain agreements in the consciousness in relation to the dark forces of a nature that allow our harm, capture, and nullifying at their hands, can this be potential experience which can play out between ourselves and the reptilian controllers. The dark forces have made it their business to manage all consciousness to the extent that the overall of it is as agreement and a support structure to the reptilians, their power and their position as controllers. Consequently, practically every body form in creation harbours these agreements, which render them vulnerable to the dark force reptilians. Should individuals then elect to operate in ways that are a perceived threat to the control systems, easy is it then for these agreements to be taken advantage of, and the individual in question shut down, neutralized, or eliminated. The process of awareness involves a releasing of all consciousness idea agreements, which is a gradual liberation from all effects, the vast bulk we will be unconscious of, those secured throughout our many lifetimes, that ultimately we progressively become ever more untouchable in creation, including by the hands of the dark forces in all their expressions. For if I hold to no idea, I can be the effect of nothing unless I consciously choose to be. Along a process of consciousness, personal self and creation facing and releasing, and additionally, as multi-dimensional beings, We have all manner of body vehicles and aspects operating throughout the dimensions of creation that will be at their own respective positions in relation with life, that eventually all will rather be aligned, as they all are parts of the overall personal self-consciousness, which in its entirety must have intent to set with the all is, if it is to serve its created function as the tool for this real purpose of recognizing the true reality and not present as resistance. For indeed, I would be deployed to rescue in actuality 2 individuals from the complex, those that had been contained by the dark forces, the identity of one unknown to my personal self, but the other was in fact one of my many multi-dimensional aspects. A case, then, of mounting a rescue of one's self, a part of the created self at any rate, and for whatever reason it had been deemed a threat to the controllers and placed in suspension. I was met with very little resistance, as though it was thoroughly unexpected for anyone to be able to even find and access the complex, and so very little consideration was given in regards to security measures. Necessary was it for me to nullify a few individuals, but the complex was overall manned by scientific characters, and ultimately I would find where in the complex my aspect and the other was contained. The real awareness able to determine the mechanism and means of their release from their suspended coma states. For the real awareness is a part of the isness everything that animates through all consciousness, as it effects into every simulated circumstance. Every eventuality can be handled, regardless of the technology involved, as we lean to the real awareness and its creational oversight, allowing it to dictate the actions of our simulation-inserted forms without a personal self-interjection. The complex, as I mentioned, also served ill-intended purposes in regards to the application of the technology that was in constant development, and so, having liberated my aspect and the other, a male human, as I led them from the building, I would access certain of the computers en route and rather set a built-in self-destruct sequence into motion, that on our departure, so the complex would be levelled, its operation brought to conclusion, a case of a destructive idea meeting its own effects, with myself stepping into the role as the delivery mechanism. The scene would switch, and now I was tasked with frequenting 2 archaic-looking castles, both stationed in the same overall dimensional region, though separated by a certain distance. It seemed I had inserted myself into a particular point in a cause and effect timeline, that from the personal self-consciousness perspective, so I was effectively visiting these castles in the past. Although everything, every idea, past, present, and future, is a present in the nowness of the true reality, real awareness, hence our ability to enter at any phase or stage along the timeline of any species or civilization on the creational side. Although ideas compound and build upon themselves, that as we do enter at moments prior to what is construed as the present, or the present as the consciousness presents it as the current moment of our experience, should we alter the ideas that led up to the current experience, so must it in turn be altered. The equivalent of editing the movie that its final cut now is different to how it originally was, and these castles represented key positions in the dimensions they were in, as though, by virtue of their presence, they had a certain impact on everything taking place there. It appeared I was assigned to make adjustments to these castles, or rather the frequencies they either were producing or were effecting through their positioning, the sense of them perhaps placed on, say, the equivalent of ley line convergences, energy centres, that then caused a distortion to what should have been a harmonious energetic arrangement. A method as utilized by the dark forces, where they will place their structures on the Earth's major energy points and centers to harness and impact unduly the energy of the planet and human consciousness. No impressions would reveal if these were dark force structures, though this was a safe assumption, for whatever in creation this was, so the impact caused was adverse and deemed necessary to nullify at a point in the past so called. I would enter each castle in turn, and although what occurred within each of their walls made visually little sense to the personal self and defied description, the overall impression was of a neutralizing of these castles and their impact that then had the timelines, the ideas of consciousness reconstituted, and the impact that had been so for the longest time now was absent, rippling through to the present as the castles are still standing, but no longer distorting energy that had been severely debilitating consciousness-wise. For indeed, I would visit the castles again in the present, so-called, to as though determine my success, and in the company of my father, though impressions revealing he was in actuality a real guide, assuming his form. The guide and myself would have an audience with a man who presented himself as a magical practitioner of some repute, and he would confirm that the castles now were nullified. Evidently, he had been taken into our confidence in regards to my operations. He seemed to be a very aware individual in his own right, and would gesture to the ground. The ground would seem to dissolve and become as a liquid medium, although the guide, myself, and the magical character were able to stand upon it. We now were stood upon a vast ocean, as though the castle we were in still was present, but absent of its base. Beneath the surface I could perceive a vast whale, and with encouragement from the guide I would slip into the waters and as though merge with it, the magic man curious to see as to what extent I could be with the whale throughout the duration of the journey it took me on. For merged with the whale, so I would experience quite the duration of a passing through the waters of the deep sea, the personal self entertaining the vague notion of concern in regards to breathing ability, but it was a consideration with little conviction, the sense of my knowing that breathing wasn't an issue that had these personal self-qualms as rather fleeting, and eventually I would disengage from the whale, separate from it, and return to the castle, the floor solidifying once again, and the sea no longer visible. The guide and the magic man would receive me, and be seemingly pleased with what had transpired. Overall, my operation to nullify the castle's adverse energetic impact on consciousness had been successful, and now the scene would switch again. I would find myself in another altogether different location, along similar lines to the awareness of safe zones and sanctuaries that are the real side universities, a kind of new friend community where all present were generally beyond the ability of anything untoward to impact or trespass upon, a dark force absent safe haven. Present would be innumerable individuals and body forms, all of which were at varying respective stages of their awareness processes, but of all that were congregated here, I would only recognize new friend Val, Jeremy, and DUANE. At that moment, DUANE was systematically evaluating each individual present as though affording each a private one-on-one for the purposes of determining as to their ongoing process and ascertaining what needed facing, what, if any, ideas were being held to that presented as restricting and rather required to be addressed, etc. That as each of the awareness-embracing individuals returned from DUANE's office, where the evaluation was conducted, they all would appear somewhat more vibrant than when they had entered, as though a great weight lifted from their shoulders, or rather, perhaps, the realization of debilitating ideas held to that had been subsequently released. Some of the body forms would enter DUANE's office rather disfigured, but return with the distortion now absent, for it is so that our body forms reflect the consciousness. The greater the distortion of a consciousness, so this is mirrored in reflective accord with the body types we operate as. Remove the limiting, destructive ideas, and the effects no longer are present, expressed in our body forms, becoming less monstrous or distorted, and I have shared a number of previous real side experiences, whereas the dark forces in particular step up, there is quite the contrast in what their body forms become in comparison to what they previously were. I would be called into a DUANE's office, and he would begin his evaluation of myself. He would highlight a number of physical issues I have had to endure, effects I have had to deal with through a prior lifetime causes set in motion, a number of which now were on the verge of resolution, as that which was causing their manifestation, the idea agreements, are in the process of imminent release. I have had innumerable previous lifetimes operating in dark force capacities and various associated body forms, reptilian, demonic, etc. This DUANE would be aware of as he leafed through a large book that contained the overview of my previous lives. He would determine the common threads or the ideas that interwove through all of them, pointing out certain of the ideas in association that had been faced, released, but also others stemming from my dubious past lifetimes, that although I currently no longer was operating in such dark force capacities, these certain idea attachments and agreements were retained, were not serving as beneficial, and preferable would it be for their release. This I would agree with, and just like it is with the guides, DUANE has the ability to remove tap lines, but only with our agreement, or indeed, what would be the point, as we simply would reinsert them through an inability to release the attachment that pertain to our tap lines. His method was curious. It involved the necessity of rendering me unconscious, the created consciousness self at any rate, and where I would switch my view to that of my real awareness, aside from the scene and what was transpiring with my created self, and would observe proceedings from this position. While in this state, it was as though DUANE, with Vow's assistance, was removing certain dark force affiliated lifetimes of agreements and attachments from my consciousness, but additionally that they were seeking something also contained there, something that stemmed from a former lifetime where I operated as a dark force reptilian. Whatever it was of importance, something technological, as though a long-forgotten file of my subconscious, which now would be vital for certain of the galactic projects. DUANE was gathering the information, recording it on a very sophisticated handheld device, in the language of the reptilians, but of a very ancient form, from who knows how many eons ago in the history and evolution of the reptilian species. DUANE had a short time window to extract this information. For the moment it was accessed from my consciousness, the dark force controllers were alerted, and evidently this was something they didn't desire to be known or acquired, whatever it might have been, as no specifics or impressions regarding it were forthcoming, other than it being of tremendous importance. I had the impression of armies of various expressions of the dark force reptilians converging on the position we were in, perhaps indeed an awareness a safe haven, but as we hold to the ideas of others, we always can facilitate the effect of them into our experience, irrespective of where in creation we may be. And as I still retained certain ideas in affiliation with the reptilians stemming from my previous lifetimes, this presented as conduits by which potentially manifested at any moment could be the dark forces into my midst, as though I always held the door open to them. A connection that can have its beneficial merit as I go about certain of my assignments and can make a contact rather readily with the dark forces consequently, which in certain circumstances is an aid to success where my real side operations are concerned, but additionally can allow them to encroach upon my experience at any time, as was the case here, that the dark forces were now able to access the awareness safe haven position through me, motivated as they were due to DUANE acquiring some very sensitive data that the reptilians had kept concealed for the longest time, unearthed from my subconscious. There the experience would end. Undoubtedly, DUANE would have attained the information he sought, but I would not receive the view of what transpired as a result, and I'm sure there will be subsequent real-side repercussions for all that transpired in this overall experience, as everything that took place wasn't especially pleasing for the Dark Force controllers, and perhaps a further light may be shed regarding the application for that which DUANE secured in future experiences.